Hi, Year 11s. So we're going to be doing a revision video on how to deal with flowcharts in your assessment. So we're going to be looking at mainly exam techniques, so how do you access these questions. But just as a reminder, when you're revising over programming, there's three things you need to do. The first one is learn your keywords. So what does iteration mean? What does selection mean? What does variable mean, assignment, those kind of words, so you know how to use them, and if you see them in the exam, you know what they mean. Code patterns are really important, so you need to know at this stage how to write input statements, how to write as a while loop, how to write if statements, etc. So make sure you revise of those, have examples of each of those in your flashcards is really important. And obviously what we're doing today is, well, how do you access the exam questions? How do you kind of use the code patterns to answer the questions? How do you use your keywords, etc. So that's what we're going to look at now. So, and again, just a reminder of your code patterns. Now, how you put these in your flashcards is up to you, but this is what I would probably do. I would probably have each of the code patterns that we've learned as examples, and I'll make sure I understand what they are. That might mean that you annotate them. So for example, we always have a variable here when we use inputs. Okay, that's the most common mistake I see in assessment. We always have the command input. We always have our circle brackets. You get the idea, hopefully. Okay, so how do we write each of these main things? Okay, so on this slide are some of the most common ones. In all honesty, if you have these under your belt, you'll be able to access maybe 60% of the programming you have to do. So actually, there's not a huge amount that you need to remember for programming. It's all about the application exam technique. Okay, but do obviously have them in your notes. I will do a video on looping later as a homework for you guys. However, just a reminder, you have your counter-controlled loop, which we've looked at a lot. OCR sometimes use something called a for loop, which we don't really have in Python, but you might come across it in the exam. Essentially, they're the same thing, okay, it's just written slightly differently, but we will have a little focus on how to convert between two. So if you do see it in the exam, it's not going to shock you too much, but we'll do that later. Slightly more advanced use of if statements, you might have a structure where you have elif, okay, and this allows you to do, well, is it this statement, or is it this statement, or is it this? Okay, so is it red, or is it yellow? If not, well, I don't know what that color is. Okay, so the else is the false part of this statement, and then you can daisy chain as many if statements together as you want to, but only ever one will run. Okay, so that's a bit more advanced programming, but obviously you guys are all advanced and you can handle that one nice and easy. Also, counter control loops can go backwards. Okay, so we have start at a large value and end at a small value. So just kind of a reminder that we can create any pattern of numbers that we want to using a while loop. Okay, so let's now look at how the exam questions might look. So you might be given some code, okay? It might look something similar to this. It's probably going to have some if statements in it and some inputs in it and some print statements and some basic maths. I have no idea what the code will be, obviously, excuse me, but obviously you need to be able to read it. So if we kind of look at these questions, it says, what would the output be if I put in 2 and 2? So if x is 2 and y is 2, so what happens is we're now plugging in values for figures. As if you've run the code and you've typed in 2 when it first asks you for a number, then when it says enter another number, you press 2 again. Okay, so using the 2 values in this table. So if we look at that, well, x is 2 and y is 2. Well, 2 is not smaller than 2, so that's false. So we're going to run this else statement. Then it says, if x minus y equals 0, well, 2 minus 2 is 0, well, 0 is equal to 0, so this is true. So it's going to output they are the same. So when we're running this, that's the kind of process you do. You kind of read through the code step by step, line by line, to actually work it out. Let's do the next one as well. I'll use a different color so you can see it. So we have 20 and 3. So x is 20. You'll have to excuse me, it's very hard to write with a trackpad. And y is 3. Okay, well, let's do the same again. Is 20 smaller than 3? No. So I'm going to go straight to the else again. Okay, so 20 minus 3, is that equal to 0? Well, no, of course it's not. So that's false. I'm going to run the else this time. So now I've got a variable z, which says x plus y. Well, x is 20, y is 3, 20 plus 3 is 23. So it's going to print out the variable z, which has the value of 23 in it. So the output of the second one will be the number 23. So that's all we have to do for these style questions. And what these questions are designed for, okay, is to help you read the code, okay? Is to slow you down a little bit in the exam and make sure you read through line by line so you understand what the code is doing, what each line means. So when it comes to drawing a flowchart from it, you're not kind of bamboozled by it, all right? So that's the reason why that question's in there. Now you may be asked to draw a flowchart based on some code, okay? So that's probably the most common way they might ask you to draw a flowchart. Now I know some of you might not have done flowcharts for a while, which is why I thought it'd be really good to revise it with the entire year group. So we have different shapes for flowcharts. So remember, for input outputs, we have a parallelogram, okay, which looks like this. An action and process, you use a rectangle, and our decisions, we use a diamond. Okay, so we're going to be using those shapes. What you then have to do is looking at each line of code, what shape do I use? Okay, that is the skill, that's the technique you need. Okay, so for the first one, we've got input and we've got it twice. So I'm going to need two shapes. Got 2 lines of code, 2 shapes. Exam tip: 1 line of code equals 1 shape in Python, sorry, in the flowchart, right? So that's an input. So remember, input output was a parallelogram. So actually, it will be that shape there. Okay, so that's what it will look like. When I'm actually drawing it out, I'll probably draw my parallelogram out, and then inside it, I'd go x equals input, and I'd actually write out the command again inside the parallelogram. Okay, that just shows you understand what the shape is, and also make sure that you've got the right kind of code in there. So what I've got so far is I've got parallelogram for this one, and I've got parallelogram for this one. So I'm going to have 2 parallelograms, and there's going to be a line between them because they're in sequence, they're in order. And now I've got an if statement, so that is going to be the diamond shape. Now, with the diamond shape, okay, we're going to have the condition. So I can just put if in there. So if x is less than y, x is less than y. Now, remember, with decisions, we're going to have 2 lines coming out of it. Okay. This is where the skill of flowchart comes into it. So we did this in Key Stage 3, if you remember, and that's going to have a kind of the true line, and we're going to have a false line. You can put yes and no as well. That's perfectly acceptable. Okay, so true, is that condition true? If x is smaller than y, if that's true, well, reading the code, I'm going to be doing this part, won't I? So actually, these 2 bits will be drawn here. Okay, I haven't got room on the slide, but essentially we'd have like the rectangle, and then the print will be our parallelogram. So it would look like this, with arrows going between them like that. Okay, and then for the false part is the else. Well, the next thing we'll have is an if statement. So actually on the false, I draw another diamond, and I do pretty much the same thing again. So when I have a decision, I must have 2 things coming out of it, yes and no, true and false, okay? And then if it's true, I do that part of it. If it's false, I do the else part. So when I have a simple calculation, there's a little bit of maths, where I'm assigning a variable, or doing anything like that, then I will use the rectangle shape, the process shape, okay? So that would look something like this. I literally go z equals, and essentially I'm just writing out the code again, okay? So that's what those will look like. And again, you can see that here as well, and I'll just simply have a rectangle for this one as well, and be z equals x plus y. Okay, now when we have our print statements, well, our print statements are input and output. Print is output. So again, we're going to use a parallelogram to draw it. Okay, like that. So long and short of it, the tips are, first of all, each line of code has one shape. They are joined together in a sequence. And when we have an if statement, we can have two things coming off it, a true, false, yes, no. So what I'd like you to do now is pause the video and I'd like you to have a go at the first question in the homework. Okay, now we're going to go the other way around. Sometimes it might give you a flowchart and ask you to draw Python code from it. And it's the exact same process, okay? We're going to take each box of the flowchart and turn it into Python code. Now, in this scenario, okay, the first one is slightly cheeky because it says input A, B, and C. So they're asking for 3 inputs there in one box. So actually, this is going to be 3 lines of code. Now, that is kind of the code I might write. I will probably, if I was writing this out properly, I'd put like maybe a question in there. But actually, the thing we're looking for is the word inputs and the correct variable there. That's what we're looking for. So when we're doing this, okay, you have to remember what each shape means, the parallelogram. Okay, we know what input is and what's the code pattern for it. Okay, I have seen people, when they do this, just simply write inputs. Okay, as I said, it's really hard to write using the trackpad. So this could input A, and then think that's right. Okay, that's not Python code though, is it? Okay, it's going to look like this. So actually, that's where your code pattern comes into it. So remember at the start of the video I said your code patterns are really important. If you remember them, the rest of the questions become a lot easier. So that's why learning how to structure an input statement, knowing what all the parts mean. Well, I always have a variable, I always have the word input, I then always have like some kind of prompt. Remembering those 3 key elements of an input statement allows you to write them in the exam. Okay, so that's the reason why you revise that part of it. So that will turn into an input. So when we have a rectangle, that's normally a little bit of maths or maybe just a variable assignment. So in this scenario, it's just setting a variable, okay? And the code would simply look like that. Notice it's exactly the same. So now I've got inputs, A equals inputs, B equals input, C equals input, and then max equals A, okay? And that's it. So the sequence is very similar. Okay, so remember when we do it from Python to flowcharts, we had a line Python, we drew a shape for it. Then in the next line, we drew a shape underneath it, we drew an arrow. This case, we've got a shape and an arrow. So we'd have the input first, then our max equals A. Okay, so we're just following the same sequence. So now we have a diamond. Remember, diamond always represents an if statement. They can technically also represent a while loop, but it's never cropped up in the exams. It is 98% sure that it's always going to be an if statement, which is why I'm telling you it's an if statement. Okay. If it is going to be a loop, okay, just in case it is, you'd see the arrow go back to an earlier part of the code, and then instead of putting if, you'd write while. Okay. Anywho's, this is where we use our if statements. Okay, so we've got 2 if statements after each other. Okay, so that's a classic maybe elif one. If you write 2 if statements, that's perfectly fine. You get the mark as well. Okay, elif is probably the more correct way of doing it though. So that's how it's structured. And remember, when we've got a true and false part, okay, so if it's true, it'll go this way, so it'll do this part of the code. And if it's false, it'll go to the next part of the if statement, either the else, or if there's another elif, go to that one. And then when a print, we just simply use our print commands. Okay, so remember, if I'm printing a variable out, okay, which we're doing here, okay, no quotes, so it will look a bit like this one. Okay, if it's printing out some text, it will have quotes because it'd be a string, wouldn't it? It'd be a bit more like that one. Okay, Although I've put output and concatenation there, you probably only need to print out, well, in this case, you only need to print out max, and that's what the command will look like. But I'll just show you that for completeness. Okay, so that's the end of the video. What I'd like to do now is do the second question, which is to convert a flowchart into Python code.